The Concord of Elder Stars did not shout when it cast humanity out. That was the part Wren Solari would remember longest, the part that would sit in her chest like a stone for years afterward. There was no thunder, no fleet of warships blackening the sky over Earth, no ultimatum screamed across 1,000 channels. The greatest civilization the galaxy had ever assembled did not consider humanity worth the volume. It simply signed a page of light and turned away, the way a person steps around a puddle without looking down. Wren was 20 years old the day the edict came, and she watched it arrive not on Earth but from the observation gallery of the orbital yard called Meridian, where she had spent the last 4 years learning to build ships that would never be allowed to fly the good lanes. She was an apprentice shipwright, 3rd rank, with grease under her fingernails, and a habit of naming every hull she touched. She had a face that had not yet decided whether it would be hard or kind, and hands that already knew more than the rest of her did. When the Concord's message unfolded across the gallery's great window, she was halfway up a gantry with a plasma torch cooling in her grip, and she froze there, one boot on a rung, and read the words that ended the only future she had been raised to expect. By the authority of the Assembly of Eons, the message said, and the Concord of Elder Stars entire, the species designated human, homeworld Sol 3, is hereby stricken from the register of recognized peoples. All births, all lanes, all charters, all embassies, all shares in the common weal are revoked. Let them keep their world. Let them keep their sky. Let them keep nothing else. It was signed with the sigil of the Vashai, the oldest of the elder races, whose ships were grown rather than built, and whose patience was measured in the lifespans of stars. Beneath the Vashai sigil were the marks of 40 others, the great and ancient peoples who had gathered humanity into their society 3 generations before, welcomed the young species with cool ceremony, given it a single seat at the far end of a long table, and watched it with the mild curiosity one gives a fire that might either warm the room or burn it down. They had decided it would do neither. They had decided it would simply go out. Wren climbed down from the gantry very slowly. Around her the yard had gone silent, 40 human workers and a dozen of the small gray Osk who labored beside them all staring at the same window. And in that silence she could hear the yard breathing, the tick of cooling metal, the hum of the gravity plates, the small mechanical sighs of 100 half-built ships that had just, in the space of a sentence, become worthless. Meridian Yard existed to build hulls for the Concord's outer trade, cheap, sturdy freighters that no elder race wanted to bother building themselves. Humanity had been the galaxy's laborers, its hull scrapers and cargo haulers, its useful hands. Now even that was taken. "Why?" said a voice beside her, and she turned to find old Doran Kell, the yardmaster, gripping the rail with both huge scarred hands. He was the closest thing Wren had to family, a man who had taught her the difference between a weld that would hold and a weld that would only look like it. His voice was not angry. It was bewildered, and that was worse. "Girl, tell me why. We never fought them. We never raised a hand. We did everything they asked." That was true, and it was the wound at the center of everything. Humanity had not rebelled. It had not built forbidden weapons or seized forbidden worlds or spat in the face of the elder races. It had been, by every measure the Concord claimed to value, an obedient junior member for 90 years. And that, Wren would come to understand much later, was precisely the crime. The elder races did not fear humanity's defiance. They feared its speed. Because in 90 years, humanity had learned to build. It had come into the Concord with chemical rockets and a single ragged colony, and in 3 generations it had become the best shipwrights in the outer half of the galaxy. Not the grandest, not the most beautiful, the Vashai still grew living vessels that made human freighters look like tin cans, but the fastest, the cheapest, the most inventive. Human yards turned out hulls in weeks that took elder races years. Human engineers looked at a problem the Concord had declared unsolvable for 10,000 years, and solved it over a long weekend, because no one had told them it was impossible. And the elder races, who had ruled the lanes for so long that they had forgotten they were ruling anything at all, looked at the little fast-building species and understood, with the sudden cold clarity of the very old, that if humanity were given another century, it would not be their laborer. It would be their heir. So they closed the door, quietly, legally, with the full weight of 40 ancient signatures, before the child could grow. Wren did not understand all of that on the day of the edict. What she understood was Doran Kell's face, and the silence, and the way the great window kept showing those words as if it wanted to be sure no one missed them. She understood that the ships around her would never fly the lanes. And she understood, with a flash of feeling she did not yet have a name for, that being told you are nothing is not the same as being nothing, and that the two things could be pried apart if a person was stubborn enough to try. The withdrawal happened over the following 90 days, and it was, in its cold efficiency, a masterpiece of humiliation. The Concord did not send soldiers. It sent clerks. Lane authority after lane authority revoked humanity's transit codes, so that a human freighter approaching a jump gate would simply find the gate refusing to open, the ancient machinery declining to recognize a species that no longer existed on paper. Ports that had docked human ships for 90 years sealed their berths. The great exchange at Alduin, where humanity had traded ore and hulls and honest labor for medicine and knowledge and passage, struck every human account to zero in a single accounting cycle and returned nothing, because you cannot owe a debt to something that is not a recognized people. One by one, the elder races recalled the observers, the advisors, the mild, watchful diplomats who had sat at the edge of human affairs for 3 generations. They took their libraries with them. They took their star charts, their medical databases, their engine schematics, everything humanity had been permitted to borrow but never to own. They were very correct about it. They left receipts. And they left humanity its sky, exactly as promised. Earth spun on, blue and green and untouched, and its colonies on Mars and the moons of the outer world spun on beside it, and none of them were harmed, and all of them were sealed. Humanity was permitted to exist. It was simply forbidden to matter. The lanes that had carried human ships to 1,000 ports now ended, for humanity, at the edge of its own solar system, at a line the Concord drew in the dark and called the Reach, beyond which no human vessel would be recognized, aided, sheltered, or acknowledged, forever. There was fury, of course. Wren watched it move through the human worlds like weather. There were speeches in the old parliaments, fists raised at the sky, plans for fleets and reprisals and desperate voyages to plead humanity's case before the assembly of eons. She watched a delegation launch from Earth in the finest ship humanity still owned, carrying the wisest and eldest of human leaders to beg for reconsideration. And she watched that ship come home 11 months later, having never been allowed to dock anywhere, having spoken to no one, having been met at every gate by the same recorded message in 40 languages. This people is not recognized. There is no one here to hear you. The old men came home and they were broken, and Wren understood something looking at them on the docks, something that set the shape of the rest of her life. She understood that the old way of asking would never work again, because the old way of asking assumed that humanity's worth was something the conquered could grant or withhold. As long as humanity stood at the elder race's door and begged to be let back in, it would be, forever, a thing that lived or died by their permission. The delegation had gone to prove humanity deserved a seat at the old table, but the table itself was the trap. She was 20 years old and nobody's leader, and she had no right to the thought, and she had it anyway, standing on a cold dock watching broken old men descend from a ship that had flown 11 months to be told it did not exist. The thought was this: we do not need their table. We can build our own. It was, she would admit later, an absurd thing for an apprentice shipwright to think. But absurd things are only absurd until someone builds them, and Wren had spent her whole short life learning that the distance between impossible and finished is mostly just work. She did not announce the thought. She was 20. No one would have listened. Instead, she went back to Meridian Yard, which was slated now for decommissioning like everything else, its contracts void, its workers to be scattered back to Earth to take up whatever small permitted lives remained. And she walked its long dark aisles, past hull after hull of ships that would never fly the lanes, and she began, very quietly, to count. She counted hulls. Meridian held 41 in every stage of completion, sturdy freighters built to human designs, ugly and reliable and fast. She counted engines in the yard stores, and reactor cores, and the great spools of superconducting line, and the fabrication bays that could, if fed raw ore, print a new hull section in 9 days. She counted the workers who had not yet given up, the ones who came to the yard even now with nothing to do, because the yard was the only place their hands still knew what they were for. She counted the Osk, the small gray people who had labored beside humans for generations, and who, Wren realized with a jolt, had received their own quiet edict from the Concord a decade before, and who were, therefore, exiles too, and had been all along, and had simply been standing so close to humanity that no one had noticed they shared the same wound. And she counted the thing that could not be counted, the thing the Concord had not been able to revoke because it had never appeared on any register, the knowledge in human hands. The Concord had taken back its libraries and its schematics. It had not been able to take back the 1,000 small things a human welder knew in her fingers, the intuitions of a human navigator, the way a human engineer could look at a failing reactor and hear what was wrong before the instruments said it. That knowledge lived in people, and the people were still here, and the Concord in all its ancient wisdom had made the single mistake that arrogance always makes. It had confused the tools it lent with the hands that used them. It had taken back the tools. It had left the hands. Wren stood in the dark heart of Meridian Yard on the 90th night of the withdrawal, the night the last Concord clerk logged the last revocation and closed the file on the human species, and she put her palm flat against the cold flank of the nearest hull, a half-finished freighter with no name yet, and she felt the whole absurd shape of the future press against her hand. "All right," she said quietly to the ship, to the dark, to the 20 years of herself that had brought her here. "They think we're going out. They think we'll sit inside their line and get small and quiet and old and just fade, generation by generation, until there's nothing left but a story they tell to frighten ambitious children." She was not a person given to speeches. This was the longest one she had ever made, and she made it to a ship. "So we won't fade. We won't beg, and we won't burn their worlds, because burning their worlds would only prove them right, that we were the danger they said we were. We'll do the one thing they never planned for, the one thing that will cost them everything and let them blame no one." She patted the hull once, the way Doran Kell had taught her to test a weld. "We'll build something better than what they threw us out of. And we'll build it so good that one day their own people come to us." It should have sounded like a child's boast in an empty room. Somehow, in the dark, with her hand on the hull, it sounded like a keel being laid. The first person Wren told was Doran Kell, because there was no one else whose respect she needed more and no one else who could tell her, honestly, whether she was a fool. She found him in the yardmaster's office, a cramped room full of the smell of old coffee and hot metal, sitting in the dark with the decommissioning order glowing on his desk, and she stood in the doorway and said, without preamble, because she did not know how to do preamble, "Don't sign it." He looked up at her, this huge, tired man who had built ships his whole life and been told his whole life's work was void, and something in her face must have carried more than her words, because he did not tell her to go home. He said, "Talk." So she talked. She told him about the hulls and the engines and the fabrication bays. She told him about the Osk, and about the hands the Concord had forgotten to take back. She told him about the old men on the dock and the trap of the table, and she told him the absurd thing, the whole absurd thing, the new order built out of everything the galaxy had thrown away, and she watched his face the entire time for the moment he would laugh, or worse, look at her with pity. The moment never came. When she finished, Doran Kell was quiet for a long time. Then he stood and he walked to the window that looked out over the dark rows of condemned ships, and he said, in a voice she had never heard him use, "I built my first hull when I was younger than you. 60 years I've built ships for them. Watched every good one get flagged and shipped off to fly a lane I'd never see. You know what I thought all those years? I thought at least the ships get to go somewhere." He turned around. In the low light his scarred face looked carved out of the same metal he'd spent his life shaping. "You're telling me we could build ships that go somewhere, ours, not theirs?" "Yes," Wren said. "And you're 20 years old." "Yes." The old yardmaster looked at the girl in his doorway, the apprentice with grease under her nails and a torch scar on her forearm, and an idea too big for the room. And Wren braced herself for the weight of his experience, for all the reasons a man who had seen everything would know it could not be done. Instead, Doran Kell reached out and with one deliberate motion closed the file on his desk, and the decommissioning order winked out, and the office fell into full darkness except for the far cold light of the condemned ships through the window. "Then we'd better start," he said, "before somebody older and wiser than you talks us out of it." The hardest fight of the early years was not with the Concord. The Concord was far away behind its drawn line, indifferent, certain humanity would fade. The hardest fight was among humans, and it had a face, and the face belonged to a man named Merk Voss, and Wren would spend the rest of her life grateful that she had lost to him nothing and won from him everything. Merk was older than Wren, though not old, a broad, furious former lane captain who had flown human freighters through the good gates for 20 years before the withdrawal sealed them, and who had felt the closing of every port as a personal amputation. He was not a fool, and he was not a monster. He was a man who had loved something, the open galaxy, the lanes, the belonging, and had watched it taken from him by a page of light signed by beings who never bothered to learn his name, and the wound had gone into him and come out the other side as a single clean burning idea. Make them pay. He came to Meridian Yard in the second year, when word had begun to spread among the scattered human worlds that something was being built there, that Doran Kell had not signed the decommissioning order, that an apprentice girl had an impossible plan. He came with 200 followers, hard-handed people who had lost as much as he had and hated as clearly, and he stood in the great echoing bay where the first secret hull was taking shape, and he looked at it and he laughed, not cruelly, but in the way of a man who has found allies and wants to correct their aim. "Good," he said, walking the length of the unfinished ship with a proprietary hand on its flank. "Good, you've kept the yards, you've kept the hands. Now let's build something worth building." He turned to the gathered workers and he had a voice that filled a room, a captain's voice, and Wren felt the pull of it herself, the terrible relief of it. "They think we'll fade. Let's not fade. Let's build a fleet in the dark where they aren't watching, weapons like they've never dreamed, and then let's go back through their gates and show the whole Concord what it costs to throw away a species that builds better than they do. Not to rule them. I don't want their table. I want their fear. I want every elder race that signed that edict to spend the rest of its long life knowing that the day they cast us out was the worst mistake they ever made." He looked at the workers, and many of them were nodding, because it was a clean idea and it fit the shape of the wound. That's revenge. That's what we owe the ones who came home broken from begging at their door. Anything less is just fading slower. It was, Wren would admit for the rest of her life, the most tempting thing she ever heard, and it was tempting precisely because it was not wholly wrong. The Concord had committed a crime. The old men had come home broken. Someone should pay. Every cell in her body wanted to say yes, wanted the clean heat of it, wanted to give the wound the shape it was straining toward. She was 22 years old and she stood in the great bay with 200 angry people watching her, and a captain twice her age offering her the easy road. And she understood that if she said the wrong thing now she would lose the yard, the plan, everything, because Merk's road was faster and hotter and made more immediate sense than hers, and hers required people to be patient with a pain that wanted to move. She did not try to outshout him. She had learned already that she could not. His voice was built for it and hers was not. Instead she walked out onto the unfinished hull, up a gantry, so that she stood above them where they had to look up, and she waited until the bay was quiet, and then she asked a question. "Merk," she said, "when you're done. When we've built the fleet and gone back through their gates and burned their worlds and put the fear in them like you say. When every elder race that signed that edict spends the rest of its long life afraid of us." She let it hang. "What do their children learn?" Merk frowned. "What?" "Their children," Wren said. "The billions of them on the old worlds who never signed anything, who were babies when the edict came. When we've made their parents afraid, what's the story they grow up on? What do the elder races teach the next 100 generations about the humans who came out of the dark?" She leaned on the gantry rail. "I'll tell you, because I've thought about nothing else for 2 years. They teach that we were the danger, that the edict was wise. That the old ones who signed it were protecting the galaxy from a species that would, given half a chance, come out of the dark to burn and kill and terrorize. They teach that casting us out was the hard, sad duty of the civilized against the savage." Her voice was not loud, but it reached every corner of the bay. "You want their fear, Merk. I understand it. But their fear is the one thing that proves them right. The moment we burn a single world, we become the monster in the story they've been telling about us all along, and every soul in the galaxy who ever wondered whether the conquered went too far will look at the fire and think, no, thank the stars. They saw it coming. You won't be taking revenge on the elder races. You'll be writing their apology for them, in our own blood, and signing it." The bay was silent. Merk's followers had stopped nodding. He himself was very still, a man who had come to correct her aim and found his own suddenly heavy in his hands. "Then what?" he said, and there was less thunder in it now and more of the wound underneath. "What do we do with it? You want me to just swallow it? You want me to tell my people to forgive them, to forget the old men who came home broken?" "No," Wren said, and this was the thing she had come up the gantry to say, the thing that was either going to hold the whole project together or shatter it. "I would never ask you to forgive them. I don't forgive them either. I want you to understand that I'm angrier than you are, Merk. I've just aimed it further." She came down the gantry now slowly, so that by the end she was standing on the deck among them, a small young woman in a circle of hard-hurt people, and she spoke to them as equals. "You want them to spend the rest of their lives knowing they made the worst mistake of their existence. So do I, but burning their worlds doesn't make them feel that. It makes them feel justified. There's only one thing that makes a proud old civilization sit in the dark and know, really know, that it threw away its own future, and it isn't fear. It's watching the thing it threw away become greater than the thing that threw it. It's their own children someday choosing us over them. Not forced. Chosen. Freely. In the open where the whole galaxy can see." She looked at Merk, and there were tears standing in her eyes now, the first he had seen, and they did not make her look weak. They made her look certain. "That's the revenge that lasts, because they can never blame us for it. All we'll have done is exist out here better. They'll have no fleet to point at, no fire to hold up, no monster to teach their children about. Just the unbearable knowledge that they had us, and they were afraid of us, and they threw us away, and we became the best thing in the galaxy anyway. That's what I want them to spend the rest of their long lives knowing." She wiped her eyes, unembarrassed. "I'm not asking you to be gentle, Merk. I'm asking you to be patient, which is harder, and to aim at something bigger than a burning city. Build weapons if it makes you feel safe. We'll need some, out in the dark. But swear to me they're for shelter, not for going back. Because the day we go back to burn is the day we lose the only war that ever mattered." It took Merk Voss 3 days to answer her, and Wren let him have the 3 days, because a principle a man is bullied into is not a principle he'll keep when it's tested, and she needed him to keep it when it was tested, which she knew it would be, for the rest of both their lives. On the 3rd day he came to her in the yardmaster's office where Doran Kell sat listening, and he stood in the doorway for a long time, and then he said, roughly, My grandfather flew the first human freighter through the Alduin Gate, 60 years ago. He used to say the galaxy got bigger the day we joined it. He swallowed. You're telling me we can make it bigger than it's ever been, not for us, for everyone, and that's the thing that'll gut them worst of all. Yes, Wren said. It's a longer war than I've got the years for, Merk said. I'll never see the end of it. Neither will I, said Wren. That's how you know it's the real one. And Merk Voss, who had come to Meridian Yard to build a fleet of vengeance, stayed to build a fleet of shelter, and he became, in the decades that followed, the fiercest guardian of Wren's principle precisely because he had wanted so badly to break it, because a reformed zealot watches the door harder than anyone. It was Merk who talked down the next angry captain, and the one after that in her name with her argument for the rest of his life. It was Merk who first said aloud the phrase that became the second law of the weft, standing in that same bay a year later, watching the first ship near completion. We don't go back to burn their house, he said, to a new batch of the furious and the grieving. We build a better one and we leave the door open and we let their own children walk out to us. That's not mercy. Don't any of you think it's mercy. It's the cruelest thing in the galaxy, and it's the only revenge worth a damn. The first attempt to open a gate killed 6 people, and Merk's weapons never fired a shot in anger for as long as he lived, and both of those facts were, in their way, the founding of everything. Wren stood at the funerals of the 6 exiles who had died trying to make a road in the dark, and she did not tell the mourners that their dead had fallen in a war, because the word would have summoned Merk's old fire. She told them their dead had fallen building, which was true, and which was the only word the weft ever used for what it did, from the first cold night in the condemned yard to the last. Not fighting, not avenging, building. It was a smaller word than revenge, and a slower one, and it would take 70 years and the whole of a young woman's life to prove that it was, in the end, the larger of the two. They did not start with a fleet. They started with a lie, and the lie was small and beautiful and entirely legal, and Wren Solari was the one who found it. The Concord had forbidden humanity the lanes. It had forbidden humanity the ports, the gates, the exchange, the whole vast machinery of the recognized galaxy. But the Concord, in 90 days of clerks and receipts, had never once thought to forbid humanity the dark, because to the elder races the dark between the lanes was worthless. Their whole civilization was built on the jump gates, the ancient network of wormhole mouths that let a ship leap from star to star in an afternoon. The gates were the galaxy. Everything the gates did not touch was empty, and the elder races had not sent a ship through open, unmapped space in so many thousands of years that they had genuinely forgotten it could be done. They traveled the gates the way a city dweller travels the roads, and they had forgotten, utterly, that there was a whole country between the roads. Wren had not forgotten, because Wren built the ships that got flagged and taken away to fly the lanes, and she had always wondered, in the idle way of a person who works with her hands, what a ship could do if it were built not to fly a gate but to cross the dark. It would need to be fast, faster than any lane freighter because the distances were monstrous. It would need to make its own way, its own charts, its own gates if it could manage the trick. It would need to carry its own world with it, because there would be no ports. It would need, in short, to be everything a lane freighter was not. And humanity, alone among all the peoples of the galaxy, had the yards to build it and the hands to fly it, and now, the desperate and clarifying gift of having nothing left to lose. The first ship they built in secret at Meridian Yard, in the 6 months after Doran Kell closed the file, they named Second Answer, because the first answer, the old men begging at the closed door, had failed. It was not beautiful. It was long and lean and ugly as a working tool, a hull built from 3 condemned freighters welded into one spine, with an engine section that Doran Kell swore at for 100 straight days and Wren rebuilt 4 times. It was the first human ship designed from the keel out to cross open space, to run for years without a port, to make its own gates in the dark by a method Wren, and a half-blind Osk mathematician named Tesh worked out on the back of a fabrication order at 3 in the morning, and did not fully believe would work until the day it did. Because that was the thing the Conquered truly could not have foreseen. Humanity did not just cross the dark. Humanity learned to open it. The Elder race's jump gates were ancient beyond reckoning, inherited from a civilization older than the Vashai, machines the Elder races used and maintained but had never in 10 million years learned to build. Everyone knew you could not build a gate. It was not a rule. It was simply a fact of the universe, like the speed of light, one of the things that was and could not be otherwise. And humanity, cast out into the dark with no gates of its own, did the thing humanity always did with a fact that was inconvenient. It asked, stubbornly, foolishly, whether the fact was actually true. It took Tesh and Wren and 40 exiled engineers 11 years to answer that question, and the answer nearly killed a dozen of them. And the first 3 attempts opened holes in space that closed again, so fast they took an unmanned probe and most of a fabrication bay with them. But on a cold day in the 11th year, in the dark far beyond the reach, the ship's second answer lit a ring of human-built resonators around a patch of empty space, and the patch of empty space folded, gently, like a hand opening, and on the far side of it lay a star the Conquered had never charted, because the Conquered only ever went where its inherited gates already led. Humanity had built a gate. A small one, a crude one, a thing that groaned and needed a week to recharge and could throw a ship only 4 light years instead of 400. But it was theirs. They had made it, and a species that can make one gate can make 10,000, given time and humanity, whatever else the Conquered had taken, had been left an enormous and terrible supply of time. Wren was 31 years old the day the first human gate opened, and she stood on the bridge of second answer and watched an uncharted star bloom in the forward window, and she did not cheer. She had learned, in 11 years, that the moments that matter do not feel like victory in the moment. They feel like the floor of a new and larger room. She turned to Doran Kell, who was old now, truly old, his huge hands gone stiff, and she found him weeping without any sound at all. And she took one of those stiff, scarred hands in both of hers, and she said the only thing that fit. Now we have somewhere to go. But a road to nowhere is only a road, and Wren had understood from the first night in the dark yard that ships and gates were the smaller half of the work. The Conquered had not simply exiled humanity. It had exiled humanity's spirit, had planted in 3 generations the quiet certainty that to be cut off from the elder races was to be cut off from meaning itself, that the galaxy was a room and humanity had been put outside it, and outside the room there was only cold. That certainty was the real prison, far stronger than any drawn line, and Wren knew that if humanity crossed the dark carrying that certainty with it, it would build 1,000 new worlds, and every one of them would be a smaller, colder copy of the old room, with humanity crouched in the corner still waiting to be let back in. So the new order she built was not, first, a thing of ships. It was a thing of principles, and she argued them out over years, in the long crossings of Second Answer and its sister ships, with anyone who would fight her about them, because a principle no one has fought over is not a principle, only a decoration. The first principle was the one that had come to her on the cold dock watching broken old men. We will not ask to be let back in. It became the founding law of everything that followed, and it was harder to keep than anyone expected, because the pull of the old table was enormous. Every exiled human carried in them some private dream of the day the Conquered would send an envoy to say we were wrong, come back. And Wren spent years teaching her people to want something else more, to want a table of their own so much that the old one stopped mattering. She was not always gentle about it. There is a kind of hope that is really only obedience wearing a hopeful face, and she cut it out of the new order wherever she found it, and it made her enemies, and she kept doing it, because she had watched what the old hope did to old men on a dock. The second principle was born from the Osk. When Wren went to the small gray people and told them what humanity meant to build and asked them to build it too, not as laborers this time but as founders, equal from the keel up, the eldest of the Osk had looked at her for a long time and asked a single question. Why us? The humans were the Concord's favorite servants. Now you are free of them. Why not build a human galaxy and be the masters this time, as they were masters of you? And Wren had understood that this was the hinge of everything, that the entire meaning of the new order turned on her answer, and she had thought about the old men on the dock, and the trap of the table and the 90 days of clerks, and she had said, because I have seen exactly what it looks like to be thrown away by people who think their kind is the only kind that matters. I have felt it in my own chest, and I would rather burn every ship we've built than do it to someone else and call it justice. She had leaned forward. The Concord threw away everyone who could threaten it. You, us, a dozen others we haven't found yet. It made itself an enemy of everyone it cast out. So we will be the opposite thing. We will be the people who take in what the galaxy throws away, and we will find out, once and for all, whether the elder races were right that the discarded are worthless, or whether they were just afraid of what the discarded could become. That became the second principle, and it was the one that made the new order not merely a human project but a galactic one. The exile takes in the exiled. Any people cast out, cut off, forgotten, written off the register of the recognized, would find a berth and a share and a seat in what Wren and the Osk began in those years to call the weft, because it was woven from all the loose threads the Concord had cut away and let fall. They found more of the discarded than anyone had imagined. That was the second great thing the Concord had never foreseen, the sheer scale of what it had thrown away over its long reign. The elder races had been culling the ambitious and the inconvenient for 100,000 years, quietly, legally, one species at a time, and the dark beyond the lanes was littered with the survivors, peoples who had been struck from the register and left to fade, and who had, most of them, done exactly that, dwindling on their sealed worlds into small, quiet ghosts of what they had been. Wren's ships found them one by one, following rumors and old broken beacons, and the faint radio ghosts of civilizations the Concord had erased. There were the Ilm, a people of the deep cold who had been exiled for building thinking engines the Concord found unnatural, and who had spent 9,000 years alone perfecting them, and who could now do things with a ship's mind that made human computers look like abacuses. There were the Vaughn, winged and furious, exiled for the crime of asking the Concord too many questions about where the gates had come from, and who had spent their exile becoming the finest close space pilots in the galaxy out of sheer spite. There were the Gesh, who had been the Concord's healers once, and had been cast out when their medicine grew good enough to make the elder races nearly immortal, which the elder races decided, on reflection, they would rather keep for themselves. Each of them, when Wren's ships found them, asked the Osk's question in their own way. Why should we trust you? And each of them, when they heard the answer, when they saw that the human ships came not to conquer or absorb, but to offer a berth and a share and a seat, made the same slow, astonished turn that Wren had seen on Doran Kell's face in the dark office, the turn of a person who has spent a lifetime believing they were nothing, discovering that the belief was a lie someone else had planted in them. The weft grew, not fast at first. It grew the way Wren's people built ships, weld by weld in the dark, out of sight of the lanes, each new people adding what its long exile had taught it, until the ships that crossed the dark were no longer human ships at all but something new, human hulls and Osk mathematics and Ilm minds and Gesh medicine and Vaughn piloting, woven together into vessels that could do things no single people, and certainly no elder race had ever managed. The Concord's grown Vashai ships were more beautiful. The weft's ships were more alive, because they carried, in every system, the accumulated cunning of everyone the galaxy had ever tried to kill and failed. Wren was in her 40s when the weft laid down its first true world, and it was not a planet. That was the third thing the Concord could not have foreseen, and the one that would eventually change the entire shape of the galaxy. The elder races lived on worlds and traveled between them on the gates. They thought in planets, but Wren's people had spent decades learning to carry their whole civilization with them across the dark, and somewhere in those decades they had stopped thinking of ships as things that traveled between homes and started thinking of them as homes that traveled. The first true world of the Weft was a ship, the greatest ship anyone had ever built, a vessel the size of a small moon, grown and welded and printed over 9 years by every people of the Weft together, with gardens and rivers and 40 million souls, and its own gate forge in its belly that could open a road to anywhere. They named it Meridian, after the dead yard where a 20-year-old had put her hand on a cold hull and decided not to fade. And when Meridian lit its gate forge for the first time and stepped across the dark in a single stride that would have taken a conquered fleet a year, the whole galaxy, for the first time in 100,000 years, had something in it that moved faster than the lanes. The conquered did not notice. That was the strangest part, the part that Wren, looking back from the far end of her life, would find almost unbearably telling. For nearly 30 years, while humanity and the discarded peoples built an entire new civilization in the dark between the roads, the greatest and most ancient power in the galaxy simply did not see it, because it was not looking anywhere the lanes did not lead, and the Weft did not use the lanes. Humanity had been thrown into the one place the conquered never looked, and in that blindness humanity had been handed the rarest thing in history, the freedom to become something enormous entirely unobserved. It could not last, of course. Something the size of the Weft cannot stay hidden forever, and Wren had never intended it to. The whole point, the whole principled revenge she had promised a ship in a dark yard when she was 20, required in the end to be seen. A new order that no one knows about changes nothing. The conquered had to look, eventually, and see, and understand what its arrogance had built in the dark it despised, and that moment of seeing was the thing Wren had been aiming at her entire life, the way an archer aims not at the arrow but at the distant, unmoving mark. She just had not expected the conquered to come looking as an enemy. She had expected, foolishly, that when the elder races finally saw the Weft, they would be curious. She had forgotten, for one bad moment near the end of a long life, the lesson of the 90th night. The conquered had not exiled humanity out of contempt. It had exiled humanity out of fear. And a thing that acts out of fear, when it finally sees the size of what it feared, does not grow curious. It grows afraid. The conquered found the Weft by accident, and the accident had a name, and the name was Corin. He was 19, and he had been born aboard the traveling world Meridian, which meant he was the first thing in the whole story that the conquered had never planned for and could not undo. A human being who had never once in his life felt the cold of the closed door. Wren had been raised inside the exile, had felt the edict land in her chest at 20, had spent her life prying loose the certainty the conquered planted in her people. Corin had never carried that certainty at all. He had been born into the Weft the way other children are born into a country, and to him, the Weft was simply the world, vast and woven and alive, and the elder races were a story the old people told, a dwindling tribe of the very ancient who lived far away down roads no one used anymore and refused to build any new ones. He did not hate the conquered. That was the thing about Corin that Wren treasured and feared in equal measure. He did not hate them, because he had never once needed their permission for anything, and you cannot hate a door you have never stood in front of. He was a gate navigator, the best of the young ones, which meant his job was to ride the small, fast scout ships out ahead of the traveling worlds and open the dark, to find new stars and lay new roads and stitch the growing Weft together. Wren had taken him as her own apprentice when he was 14 and she was gray, because she had seen in him the one thing she could not teach and most needed to survive her. A person who did not have to be talked out of the old fear because he had never been in it. She was training him, though neither of them said so, to be what came after her. It was Corin, riding a scout ship called Kestrel far out past the edge of the charted Weft, who opened a gate into a star system and found, on the far side of it, a conquered lane. He had not known what it was at first. He had never seen one. He drifted kestrel in the dark at the system's edge and stared at the thing in his forward window, a jump gate of the elder races, one of the ancient inherited mouths, vast and silent and humming with a power that made his own hard-won human gate forge feel like a child's toy. And around it the traffic of the recognized galaxy, grown Vashai ships and the barges of 40 peoples, moving along a road so old it had worn a groove in the fabric of space. Corin looked at the busy ancient lane and felt no envy at all, only a kind of wonder, the way a person raised in a new city might look at a ruin and think, so this is the old place they talk about. And then a Concord patrol saw him. They saw a ship they did not recognize, of a design that appeared on no register, emerging from a patch of empty space that contained no gate, because the gate Corin had opened had already closed behind him, healing shut the way human gates did. To the patrol it was as if a ship had simply appeared out of nothing, from a direction that did not exist, and this was, to the elder races, impossible in the deepest sense, a violation of the fixed order of the universe as profound as water flowing uphill. There were no roads there could be no ship, and yet there was a ship. Corin, being 19 and unafraid and curious, did the thing that changed the galaxy. He opened a channel and said hello. He said it in the trade tongue the old people had taught him, the common speech of the recognized galaxy that no one in the weft had needed to use in his lifetime, and he said, "Good crossing. I don't think I'm supposed to be here. I'll get out of your lane." And then, because he was Corin and because he could not help it, he added, "Beautiful gate. We build ours smaller. We build ours." The patrol commander, a Vashai 3,000 years old who had spent every one of those years believing that gates were not built by anyone living, heard a child's voice say, "We build ours," and something in the ancient order of things cracked straight down the middle. The commander demanded identification. Corin gave it cheerfully, having no reason not to. "Human," he said. "Homeworld Sol 3. Citizen of the weft." And he watched, puzzled, as the recorded response came back, the same recorded response that had turned away a delegation of broken old men 40 years before, the message in 40 languages. "This people is not recognized. There is no one here to hear you." Corin laughed. Wren, when he told her later, would remember that detail above all others, that her boy had laughed easily without a shred of the old wound, because to him the message was not a wound. It was a curiosity, a quaint old error, a machine talking to itself. "There's plenty of us to hear you," he told the ancient gate. 40 million just on the ship I was born on. You should come see. You've been missing a lot." And then he opened a gate in the empty dark where no gate could be, and stepped through it, and was gone before the patrol could do anything but stare at the place where a road had been that they had not built and could not follow. He brought the news home the way a boy brings home a strange stone, delighted, uncomprehending, holding it out for the grown-ups to explain. Wren understood the moment he described the recorded message. She understood that the 40 years of blessed invisibility were over, that the Conquered had now seen a human ship do the impossible, that the greatest fear of the elder races, the fear that had driven the whole edict, the fear of what the fast little species could become, had just been confirmed in a single sentence spoken by a laughing child. "We build ours." She sat with the knowledge for a long time in the quiet of her chambers aboard Meridian, and Corin sat with her, finally beginning, from her stillness, to understand that his strange stone was something else. And when he asked her what it was, she told him the whole of it, the 90th night and the trap of the table and the promise she had made to a cold hull half a century before. It was the first time she had told the young ones the whole story plainly, and she watched it land in him, watched the boy who had never feared the door begin, for the first time, to understand what the door had done to the people who made him. "They'll come," she said. "Not clerks this time. They came with clerks when they thought we were nothing. Now they've seen what we are, they'll come with ships." She was old and she was tired and she had built a civilization out of everything the galaxy threw away, and she looked at the boy she had trained to outlive her and she said the hardest thing she had ever said. And when they come, Corin, everything I've built depends on us not becoming them. It would be so easy. We have ships that can open the dark inside their fleets. We have weapons they've never imagined because we built in a place they never watched. We could hurt them. We could hurt them so badly they'd never forget it. She leaned forward. And if we do, we prove them right. We prove we were the danger they said we were, and the whole galaxy will remember the exiles as the monsters who came out of the dark to burn the old order down. That's the story they want us to tell. It's the only story that makes their crime look like wisdom. She took his hand, her grip weaker than it had been. There's a harder story. Do you want to hear it? Yes, said Corin, and meant it. And Wren heard in the single word the whole future she would not live to see. When they come, she said, we don't hurt them. We don't run either because running just makes the door again, and I'm done making doors. When they come, we show them what we built, all of it. The traveling worlds, the woven ships, the peoples they threw away sitting at the same table as equals, the roads we make in the dark they said was empty. We don't ask to be let back in. We invite them to see. And then we do the one thing they will never be able to answer. She smiled, and for a moment the gray old founder was 20 again, standing in a dark yard with her hand on a cold hull. We let their own people choose. She explained it, and Corin understood it slowly, the way you understand something too large to see all at once. The Concord was not one thing. It was 40 ancient peoples and 100,000 years of habit, and beneath the elder races who ruled it there were billions of ordinary souls, of 100 species, who lived their whole lives on the old worlds and traveled the old lanes, and had never once been asked whether the way things were was the way things had to be. The elder races ruled by a single unspoken assumption, the same assumption that had let them exile humanity with a page of light, that there was nowhere else to go. The lanes were the galaxy. Outside the room there was only cold. That assumption was the true foundation of the Concord, older and stronger than any fleet, and Wren had spent her life building the one thing that could break it. Somewhere else to go. When they see the weft, she said, the elder races will be afraid, and they'll reach for the oldest tool they have, which is the story that outside their order there is nothing but danger and death. But their own people will see it too. The barge crews and the dock workers and the young ones on the old worlds who have spent their lives being told there is nowhere else. They'll see a place where the discarded built something better than the thing that discarded them. And once a person has seen that there is somewhere else to go, Corin, you cannot make them forget it. You can beat them, imprison them, forbid them, and it changes nothing, because the door is already open in their mind and it never closes again. She sat back. That's the revenge, not their fleet broken. Their assumption broken, and they'll never be able to blame us for it, because all we'll have done is exist out here better in the open, where anyone can see. Corin was quiet a long time. Then he asked the question that told Wren she had chosen the right heir, the question that had teeth in it. And if they come, and they see it, and they're afraid, and they attack anyway, if they decide it's better to burn us than let their people see us? Wren's face did not change. Then we survive, she said. That's all. We don't win by hurting them, and we don't win by dying beautifully. We win by surviving in the open where they can't hide us, for as long as it takes, until the last soul on the old worlds knows that the exiles didn't fade and didn't burn, but simply built a better house and left the door open. That might take 100 years. It might take longer than either of us gets to see. She looked at him steadily. I'm not asking you to win a battle. I'm asking you to hold a door open against people who have spent 100,000 years slamming it shut. It's the hardest thing anyone in this whole story will ever be asked to do, and I'm asking a 19-year-old to do it, because you're the only one of us who was never afraid of the dark on the other side. The Concord came 4 months later, and it came exactly as Wren had said it would, not with clerks but with ships, a war fleet of the elder races such as had not been assembled in 10,000 years, because the elder races did not do anything quickly, but when they finally moved, they moved with the full crushing weight of the oldest power in the galaxy. Grown Vashai dreadnoughts the size of cities, the lightning barges of the Sao, the silent gray world breakers that the conquered had built in some forgotten war and never once used, because their mere existence had always been enough. It came down the lanes, and then, at the edge of the charted weft, it did the thing the conquered had not done in 100,000 years. It left the lanes. It sailed, slow and vast and furious, into the dark it had always despised, to find the thing that had been growing there while it wasn't looking, and to put it out. And Corin, 19 years old, flew the scout ship Kestrel out alone to meet a war fleet of the eldest powers in the galaxy, carrying no weapons at all, carrying instead an invitation. And behind him, spread across the dark for a light year in every direction, silent and lit and waiting, lay the traveling worlds of the weft, 40 million souls to a hull, the whole woven civilization of everyone the galaxy had ever thrown away, arranged not for battle but for viewing, like a gallery. Like an answer, like a hand held open in the dark. Wren watched from Meridian's bridge as her boy flew out to meet the fleet, and she gripped the rail with hands gone stiff as Doran Kell's had been, and she understood that she had spent 50 years building toward this single moment, the moment the conquered finally looked, and that everything now depended on a 19-year-old who had never been afraid, flying unarmed toward the largest gathering of force in the history of the galaxy, to say the thing she had taught him. The thing that was either the bravest sentence ever spoken or the last. Come and see. The fleet did not fire on Kestrel, and that was the first small miracle, though Corin did not know how close it came. Aboard the lead dreadnought, a grown vessel called Patience of Eons that had been alive for 11,000 years, the War Council of the Elder Races watched a single unarmed scout ship drift toward them out of the dark, and half of them wanted to burn it from the sky before it could speak, because they understood, with the deep instinct of the very old, that whatever this thing was going to say was more dangerous than any weapon. It was the Vashai Fleet Mother, an ancient being named Saeorith, who had signed the original edict 50 years before with her own light, who stayed their hands. She had signed the exile of humanity as a young matriarch of only 2,000 years, confident and cold, and she had spent the 50 years since with a small, persistent splinter in her ancient mind, a question she had never been able to fully bury. What if we were wrong? She let the scout ship approach, because she wanted, after 50 years, to know. Corin opened a channel to a war fleet of the eldest powers in the galaxy and, being 19, said, "Thank you for not shooting. I know it was close. I could see the ports charging." He let that sit a moment, the disarming honesty of it, then went on in the trade tongue his old teachers had drilled into him. "My name is Corin. I was born on a ship called Meridian, in a place you threw my people away to 50 years ago. I don't remember it because it happened before I was born, and where I grew up nobody was afraid of you, so I'm not either, and I'm sorry if that's rude. I've come to invite you to see what we built." Saeorith answered him herself, her voice coming across the dark like something spoken from the bottom of time. "Child, do you know what we are?" "You're the people who threw us away," Corin said. "And you're the people who came all this way, off your roads, into the dark you hate, because you're afraid of what we grew into. Both those things are true. I'm not here to argue about either one." He guided Kestrel to a stop before the vast grown flank of Patience of Eons, one small ship before a living dreadnought, and behind him the traveling worlds of the weft hung lit and silent in the black. "My teacher is very old and very tired, and she has waited her whole life for you to look. She's watching right now. So am I, so are 40 million people on the ship I was born on, and hundreds of millions more on the others. We haven't armed a single weapon. We're not going to. All I'm asking is that before you do whatever you came to do, you come and see it, walk it, meet the people you threw away, and then decide." He paused. "You came a long way to put out a fire. The least you can do is look at it first." It was, the histories would later agree, The most audacious thing any human had ever done, more audacious even than Wren's decision in the dark yard, because Wren had staked her life on a fire no one was watching, and Corin was staking the whole of it on the mercy and curiosity of an enemy that had 100,000 years of practice at feeling neither. But he had a weapon after all, though it was not the kind that charged in a port. He had the fact of himself. He was a human being who was not afraid, and the elder races had built their entire order on the certainty that the exiles, cut off and cast out, would be afraid, would beg or rage or wither, would in every case confirm that outside the room there was only cold. And here instead was a laughing boy who had grown up in the cold and found it warm, and every second he spoke, the certainty at the foundation of the Concord cracked a little wider. Eorth came. Against the fury of half her council, against 10,000 years of her own habit, the ancient fleet mother agreed to sea, and she brought with her a delegation of the elder races, and Corin flew kestrel slowly ahead of them, leading a handful of the oldest and most powerful beings in the galaxy across the dark to the traveling world Meridian, where Wren Solari waited to meet, at the very end of her life, the people who had thrown her away at its beginning. What the elder races saw aboard Meridian broke something in them that 50 years of edicts and receipts had kept whole. They had come expecting a war camp, a huddle of the desperate, the mean furtive survival of the discarded. They found a world. They walked through gardens under a false sky, past rivers that ran the length of a moon-sized hull, through markets where a dozen exiled peoples traded and argued and lived, past yards where human hands and ill minds and Osk mathematics grew ships more alive than anything the Concord had built in an age. They saw the Gesh, whom they had exiled for healing too well, running open clinics where anyone of any people could walk in and be made well. They saw the Vaughn, whom they had cast out for asking where the gates came from, teaching children to build new ones. They saw everywhere the thing the Concord had spent 100,000 years proving was impossible, the discarded, thriving together better. And at the heart of the traveling world, in a plain chamber with a window on the stars, they found Wren. She was very old now and small in her chair, and her hands lay still in her lap, the hands that had built the first ship and opened the first gate. And when Eorth entered, the two of them looked at each other across 50 years. The matriarch who had signed the edict and the girl who had refused to fade beneath it, both of them now at the far ends of long lives, and for a moment neither spoke. It was Wren who broke the silence, and her voice was thin but it did not shake. "You look tired," she said. "It's a long way off the roads." "You have built something," said Eorth, and the ancient voice held something no human had ever heard in it, which was uncertainty. "In the dark, in 50 years, something that should have taken an age if it could be built at all." She moved closer, this vast grown being folding herself smaller to meet the eyes of a dying woman. "We threw you a stone. You have made of it a star. I have come across the dark. I despise to ask you a question I have carried for 50 years, and I will ask it plainly, because we are both too near the end for anything else." She was still. "Were we wrong?" And Wren, who had waited her whole life for this exact question from this exact mouth, did not answer it the way 50 years of buried anger might have wanted. She had thought about this moment for decades, and she had decided long ago that the answer that would change the galaxy was not the cruel one. "You were afraid," she said gently. "That's not the same as wrong, and it's not the same as right. You looked at us and saw how fast we could build, and you understood that in another 100 years we might sit where you sit, and you decided you would rather not find out. So you closed the door. It was the most human thing you ever did, if you want to know the truth. Fear of being replaced. We'd have understood it perfectly." She drew a slow breath. "The wrong part wasn't the fear. The wrong part was thinking the door would hold. You believed there was only one room, and only one table, and that everything outside it was cold and empty and dead. You believed it so completely that you never even looked, and that belief, Eorth, was the only thing keeping you the masters of the galaxy. Not your ships, not your age, just the certainty in every soul under you that there was nowhere else to go." She lifted one thin hand an inch toward the window and the lit worlds beyond it. We spent 50 years building somewhere else to go. That's all. That's the whole revenge. We never touched your fleet. We just made your one true weapon a lie. Eorith was silent for a long time, and the elder races around her were silent. And in that silence the oldest power in the galaxy understood at last and all at once exactly what had happened to it. It had not been attacked. It had not been defied. It had exiled its most dangerous rival into the one place it never watched, and thereby handed that rival the freedom to prove, in the open, before the eyes of the whole galaxy, that the Conquered's foundational lie was a lie. Every soul on every old world who ever heard that the exiles had built a better house in the dark the Conquered called dead would carry, from that moment, a door in their mind that could never again be closed. And there was nothing, nothing at all, that a fleet could do about a door in a billion minds. You could have heard us, Eorith said slowly. The boy said your weapons are things we have never imagined. You built for 50 years where we did not watch. You could have opened your gates inside our fleets and ended us before we knew we were dying. The ancient being studied the small, still woman. Why did you not? Because then the story would be true, Wren said. The story where we were the danger and you were wise to fear us, and casting us out was the hard duty of the old protecting the galaxy from the young. If we'd burned you, every soul on the old worlds would have looked at the fire and thought, thank the stars the Conquered tried to stop them. You'd have won the argument by losing the war. Something almost like a smile moved across her worn face. I've spent my whole life refusing to give you that. We were never going to burn your house down, Eorith. That was always your fantasy about us, not our plan for you. We were only ever going to build a better one and leave the door open, and let your own people walk through it if they chose. That's not revenge by your definition. By ours it's the only kind that lasts. And it was in that moment, as the ancient fleet mother stood over the dying founder in a plain room aboard a world that traveled, that the first of the elder race's own people made the choice that would define the new age. Not a soldier, not a lord. A dockhand of the sow who had come aboard Eorith's own vessel to tend the lightning barges, and who had wandered, unwatched, through Meridian's gardens and yards and open clinics, and who now stood at the edge of the delegation, and who said, in a small clear voice that carried further than any dreadnought's gun, I would like to stay. I would like to stay. 4 words from a dockhand, and the war fleet of the eldest powers in the galaxy had no answer to them, because there was no weapon on any hull that could be aimed at a person's wish to stay. Eorith turned to look at the sow who had spoken, and the whole delegation turned with her, and for one long dangerous heartbeat the old reflex hung in the air, the reflex of 100,000 years, the reflex that said such a wish was treason and must be punished as treason. Corin saw it. He was standing at Wren's side, and he saw the ancient beings gather themselves toward the old cruelty, and he understood that this, not the arrival of the fleet, was the true edge of the whole story, the moment on which everything his teacher had built would either open or shatter. He did not reach for a weapon, because there was none, and because Wren had taught him that reaching for one here would lose everything. He reached instead for the only thing he had, which was the same thing that had gotten him this far, the fact of himself, unafraid. Let them choose, he said into the dangerous silence to the oldest beings in the galaxy, in the easy voice of someone who had never once needed their permission for anything. That's all this ever was. Nobody here is going to stop your dockhand from going home with you. That's the difference between your house and ours. In ours, the door opens both ways. He looked at the sow who wanted to stay, and then back at Eorith. If you forbid them, you'll have your answer to your own question. You'll know you were wrong, because only a thing that knows it's losing forbids people from leaving. And if you let them choose freely in the open and they still go home with you, then you'll have proved us wrong, and you can sail back down your roads and never think of us again. He spread his empty hands. Either way, the choosing has to be theirs. We didn't cross 50 years of dark to build another place where the old decide for the young. It was Wren's whole philosophy in the mouth of a 19-year-old, and Eorth heard it, and the ancient fleet mother did the thing that ended the old age and began the new one. She did nothing. She let the dock hands stay. She stood in a plain room aboard a traveling world, and with the smallest gesture of one grown limb, she released a single soul from the order she had upheld for 11,000 years. And in that release the Concord's foundation, already cracked, quietly gave way. Because a power that lets one person choose has admitted forever that choosing is possible, and no fleet in the galaxy can unadmit it. The news of it moved through the fleet faster than any order. There is no way to keep such a thing quiet. 100,000 years of habit is heavy, but the sight of a door opening is lighter than air, and it travels. By the time the delegation returned to Patience of Eons, a dozen more had asked to stay, and by the end of that first day it was 100, and Eorth understood that she was watching not a mutiny but something worse and gentler and utterly unstoppable, the slow turning of ordinary souls toward the fact that there was, after all, somewhere else to go. She could have forbidden it. She could have sealed her ships and burned the traveling worlds and dragged her fleet home down the old roads. But she had walked Meridian's gardens with her own eyes, and she had heard a dying woman name the Concord's one true weapon and call it a lie, and she was 3,000 years old, and she was, at the very end, honest. And she knew that a fleet sent home full of souls who had seen the door would only carry the door home with it, into the heart of the old worlds, where it would open in 1 billion more minds. There was no version of this in which the Concord won. There had not been since the 90th night, 50 years before, when a girl put her hand on a cold hull. The elder races had simply taken 50 years to arrive at the moment of seeing it. Wren did not live to see the whole turning. She died 3 days after Eorth came aboard quietly in the plain room with the window on the stars, with Corin's hand in hers, and her last words were not a speech, because she had never been a person given to speeches. She looked at the boy she had trained to outlive her, the human being who had never been afraid, and she said, "Keep it open. That's all. Whatever it costs. Keep the door open both ways forever, even for them, especially for them." And then the founder of the weft, who had been thrown away by the galaxy at 20 and had refused for 70 years to fade, closed her eyes in a house she had built out of everything the galaxy discarded, and was still. They did not build her a tomb. She had left instructions, and the instructions were characteristic. They put her aboard the first ship she had ever built, the ugly welded thing called Second Answer that had crossed the first dark and opened the first gate, and Corin flew it out past the lit worlds and the silent fleet, and he opened one last gate for her, a road into an uncharted star she had never seen, and he let the little ship carry her through it. Into the dark she had taught a whole civilization was not empty, but only unbuilt. It was the truest thing anyone could have done for her. She had spent her life making roads where there were none. They gave her one more. The age that followed did not have a battle in it, and that was the thing the histories would find hardest to explain, because every age before it had turned on a battle, and the elder races had ruled so long by the threat of force that it seemed impossible their reign could end without it. But it did. It ended the way Wren had designed it to end, one choosing soul at a time. Eorth took her fleet home, and the fleet carried the door in it, and within a generation the old worlds were emptying, not in war but in the oldest human motion of all, the drift toward somewhere better, as the ordinary billions of the Concord's 100 peoples discovered that the exiles had built a house with the door left open, and that they were, all of them, welcome. The Concord did not fall. Nothing so violent. It simply became, over the years, the old country, the quiet ancient place people came from, while the weft became the place people were going. And Corin kept the door open both ways, exactly as he had been told, even when it cost, even for them. When the elder races, aging and emptying and afraid, sent their first envoys not to command but to ask timidly whether there might be a berth in the weft for the Vashai too, for the old proud grown people who had signed the edict and now watched their own worlds grow quiet, Corin did not turn them away. He remembered a dying woman saying especially for them, and he understood at last why. Because the entire point, the whole meaning of the principled revenge Wren had promised a cold hull 70 years before, was to prove that the discarded were not what the conquered said they were, and you cannot prove that by discarding your discarders. The weft took in the elder races the same way it had taken in the Osk, and the Ilm and the Von and the Gesh, as founders, equal from the keel up, and the Vashai who had grown living ships for 10 million years brought that art into the woven fleet, and the ships of the new age were more alive and more beautiful than anything either people could have built alone, which was, of course, the entire point, and always had been. They called it the weft in Wren's lifetime, but the name that stuck, the name the whole galaxy would use for the age that followed, came later, and no one is quite sure who said it first. Some say it was Corin, grown old himself at last, standing on the bridge of a traveling world watching a road open in the dark. Some say it was a child. They called it the open galaxy, and they meant it plainly. A galaxy with no closed doors in it, no register of the recognized and the discarded, no single table at which some sat and others begged, no lane a soul could not travel and no dark a soul could not cross. It was not a peace enforced by anyone's fleet. It was something stranger and steadier, an order held together not by force but by the simple, unkillable fact, planted in every mind of every people, that there was always somewhere else to go, and that the somewhere else would always leave the door open. The elder races had banished humanity from galactic society expecting it to fade, to grow small and cold and quiet inside a drawn line until it was nothing but a story. And humanity had taken its revenge, exactly as a laughing boy had promised a war fleet in the dark, exactly as a dying woman had promised a cold hull 70 years before. But the revenge had not been the breaking of the conquered's fleet, which humanity could have done and chose not to. It had not been the burning of the old worlds, which would only have made the old lie true. The revenge had been the building of something so much better than the thing they were cast out of that the galaxy itself changed its shape to move toward it, until the very meaning of the word society was rewritten by the people who had been told they were no longer part of it, and the door that 40 ancient signatures had slammed shut on a young species was answered, not with another closed door, but with a galaxy that would never again close one. Long after, when the traveling worlds numbered in the thousands and the roads in the dark had grown so many that no one could count them, they still told the story to the children of the open galaxy, the human children and the Osk and the Von and the young Vashai alike, all of them woven now into one people who no longer remembered which of their grandparents had been the exiles and which the exilers, because in the open galaxy it had stopped mattering, which was the whole point. And the story always ended the same way, with the same image, the one every child in the woven worlds could see in their mind before they were old enough to understand it. A 20-year-old girl, alone in a dark and condemned yard, with her hand flat on the cold flank of a ship that had nowhere to go, deciding not to fade, and a 19-year-old boy, 70 years later, flying an unarmed ship out to meet the largest fleet in the history of the galaxy, carrying no weapon but the fact of himself and 3 words that opened an age. Come and see, the story ended. They came, and the galaxy that came to look at what the exiles had built never went home, because the exiles had built the only thing the old order could not answer and the new one could not live without. Not a weapon, not a wall, a door left open in the dark forever for anyone, even them.